All right, today we are going to be talking with Jeff Messer. He is currently running a Kickstarter called Sex, Spies, and Rock and Roll. Um, I was made aware of this by my good friend Mike Spring, who's a common friend between the two of us. And Mike posted it and suggested people check it out, and I did, and it looked very interesting to me, and so I thought I'd see if Jeff would be interested in coming on and talking about it. So, and guess what? He agreed. So here he is.
Hey, that's right. I'm thrilled. I used to joke to people that I'm the most modest egomaniac you'll ever meet. I'm very self-effacing, like Woody Allen in the early days, but I also like to talk about myself. So I'm totally thrilled to be here.
Well, if you want to start talking about yourself, one of the questions I like to start off with is if you remember, maybe the first comic that you read, or maybe what comic kind of caught your interest and made you want to read more.
Yes, I do. A very specific comic as well, and I'll try to keep this at 500,000 words or less. When I was a kid, I grew up in a really, really small town. Not even really a town. I mean, you can't call it a town. You can't call it a city. It was like a community, if you will. And there was, of course, this little corner gas station convenience store about a mile from where I lived. And my grandfather, my late grandfather, who was a bit of a sort of a humble country gentleman raconteur, better word for it might be a good BSer, would spend countless hours at this little convenience store. The old images of the old guys playing checkers around the Cracker Barrel and all of that sort of stereotype stuff. He was one of those types of guys, and he would basically go and fill up his pickup truck full of gas and go into the shop to buy a glass bottle soda and sit around for 3 hours and talk to whoever was in the store. And when I was a kid, I was guessing it was about 5, maybe, I was 5 years old. One day, and this was one of those stores that got a big, truck delivery every week. And amongst the truck was a box full of comics, and they had the place where they spread out the comic books on the little magazine rack and so forth. And my grandfather, just for whatever reason, one day went over there and just kind of thumbed through, just grabbed one and brought it home to me. As a 5-year-old kid, not really, I don't think I was reading necessarily at the time, but had, definite aspirations to be a storyteller. I got the BS gene, I think, from him. And so he brought it home, and for years I dragged this, and I when I would go to the store with him, I would sit in front of this rack because they were on the lower shelf. I would just sit on the floor and just go through the stacks of comics, and I would find covers and art and things like that. And I would get one or two here and there. A couple of years later, or a year later, I guess, Marvel started doing the Star Wars comic adaptation, and I had seen the movie and was just nuts for Star Wars. And we didn't have video on demand and even Blu-rays and DVDs, anything like that back then. And that was the only way to relive the movie. So I avidly collected that. But and that was one of two comics that I was really into. The other was Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes. Again, 70s. I'm dating myself. But the first comic that I ever got was Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes number 219. I didn't realize it for a number of years that was the issue, because after a while the cover had fallen off and the front, like some of the front pages had fallen off. So by the time I was 10 or 11, I had 2/3 of the comic, and I was like, "What happens? What happened?" So I eventually went and found a nice pristine copy of it. It was written by Jim Shooter, and it was illustrated by Mike Grell. And Mike Grell became instantly my favorite comic book creator. And I really attached to his name, and I followed his career into the 80s when he did first comics. Well, he was one of the first guys to sort of jump ship and go and do creator-owned comics with some of these independent companies in the early 80s. and his John Sable Freelance was a huge influence on me as I guess I was 13, 14 years old at the time, and I wanted to be a writer and I wanted to be a storyteller. And when I saw that comic and also Howard Chaykin's American Flag, which may have warped me a little bit at 13, but when I saw that was something of a storytelling, you just know superheroes. This was all something different. It was more adult. It was more sophisticated. John Sable was very real world. And at that time, I had discovered James Bond movies on the Sunday night movies on ABC or whatever. And so I kind of shifted from superheroes and Star Wars into spies and espionage, all of that stuff. And it was just sort of perfect timing. And, I mentioned Mike Grell because the great irony, and I'm still pinching myself. I have a permanent blue mark on my arm. About 10 years ago, well, about 18 years ago, I emailed him and just kind of a fan email, and he responded to me, and then I was too terrified to respond back. And then maybe about 8 or 9 years later, I actually met him at a convention and hit it off. We were chatting, and it was, a fan's dream come true that one of your heroes is such a nice guy. And I saw him about every year for a couple of years straight at different conventions, and we got to know each other a little bit personally. And in 2015, I went and hung out with him at a convention that was really, it was in December. It was bad weather. It was poorly attended. And so we spent a lot of social time together, and we became really good friends. And so I've been friends with one of my heroes from childhood for 6 years now. And, he's in his 70s now, and doesn't necessarily like or understand modern technology. But when I started talking to him about Kickstarter and things like that, he became intrigued. And a couple of years ago, he asked me to join him in launching some of his creator-owned projects as Kickstarters to sort of bring back some of those characters, including John Sable, which is really kind of strange that I'm getting to work with Mike on these projects. And so we've done some Kickstarters with him, bringing back several of his characters and some other things he's worked on. And then I got asked to co-write a book by Tomorrow's Publishing about Mike. It's a career book. I helped come up with the title from a phrase that he uses in his email sign-off. The title of the book is "Life is Drawing Without an Eraser." It's kind of the Mike Grell story. And this was came out in fall of 2018. And strangely enough, in the summer of 2019, we launched our first Kickstarter with Mike, and it was a huge hit. And the book that I co-wrote for Tomorrow's about Mike got nominated for an Eisner Award at San Diego Comic-Con. And I just, like the kid dream come true. Suddenly I was at San Diego Comic-Con. We didn't win the award, but holy crap, we were there. And I was like, what am I doing here? I feel like such a poser being in this room. And another kind of independent Kickstarter guy, Sean Mcardle, who has a book called The Fuhrer and the Tramp about Charlie Chaplin beating up Adolf Hitler, which is kind of a really fun book. He was nominated too, and I had found his book on Kickstarter a year earlier. And so he was at the Eisners. And so he and I sort of commiserated, and we're like, what are we even doing here? If they find out that a couple of nerd kids who are like adults now are in this room, they're going to kick us out. And he didn't win either, but we didn't care. We were just, the open bar and being in the room with Bill Sienkiewicz and Tom King and Jeanette Kahn and Paul Levitz and all of these, all these people making speeches and giving out awards. And I was like, holy crap, these are people that I've idolized for years and years. And it was just kind of an amazing experience. And I left San Diego emboldened. I'm like, you know what, now or never, I'm going to do this. And so I brought some of my own work to Kickstarter and started finding artists to work with and started producing and, putting my money where my mouth was. I fronted some money to get it started and haven't looked back since. So there you go. 500,000 words.
Well, that's a good segue into the Kickstarter.
Thanks. Yeah.
Sex, Spies, and Rock and Roll Anthology. Let me just bring that up here.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Oh,
there we go.
Hey, there we go. Yes, indeed, there it is.
Professionalism at its best.
No. Trust me, I look at all these other Kickstarters and these guys who are doing, very elaborate, graphics and designs and charts and all this sort of stuff, to this flash and all this stuff. And mine is very much just like cut and paste. I'm just like, and I try to sell it based on saying, hey, look, I think this is cool. I think you'll think it's cool too. Plus, I've got an artist working on this who did that cover art. That's now, if you take that image that you see there and turn it sideways, that's the cover. That's the cover art.
Okay.
And I had an idea for the cover, and I kind of pitched it to him and sent him some reference photos and all of these things. And he did it. And as soon as I posted that artwork online, people lost their minds. They were just like, oh my God, what is this? I want this. I don't know what it is, but I want it. And I was like, yeah, it's sex, spies, and rock and roll, all, epitomized in one photograph. And it makes you want to know more. So I can't take too much of the credit. The artist nailed it. I think he really delivered on it. And, the funny thing, and to tie this all together, when I was a teenager wanting to become a writer, I lived next door to my first cousin, and he and I, his name's Mike, and not Mike Grell, but my cousin. He and I would kind of just run together and play together as kids, and grew up together playing with Star Wars action figures. And once you get bored of trying to figure out what happens between movies, from Star Wars to Empire to Jedi, with the action figures, you're like, let's recast these guys as other characters. Let's make up our own kind of stuff. And we started doing that. And one of the riffs that we got off on was we both were suddenly getting into James Bond and all of that stuff. And we're like, oh, spies are the coolest thing in the world. Let's make up some spy things and some really cool ideas for spy stuff. And so, as teenagers, we were making up these ideas. We even designed a board game. We would play board games, and we were like, oh no, we got a big piece of, drawing paper, of construction type paper, and made a board and made board games based on the characters and all this stuff. Like I said, we lived in a small community and it was before the internet, and you had to entertain yourself. And we just created all this stuff and bounced ideas back and forth. And I was the writer of the two of us, because that's what I wanted to be. And so I would get notebooks, and I would sit in my 7th grade class, English class or science class, and I looked like the most studious guy in the class. My grade averages were C's at best in middle school, but I looked like I was working harder than anybody else because I had notebooks and I was writing stories. Teachers thought I was taking notes. It was like, he is transcribing word for word everything I'm saying. God bless this kid. Nope, I wasn't paying attention to anything. I was actually sitting there writing these stories. And thought, I'll write a series of novels, like Ian Fleming, he had all those Bond novels. I'll write a whole series of novels and whatnot. And I actually, wrote a few, and again, wrote as in handwritten. I still have them, which is, looking at them, I'm like, wow, what a wealth of embarrassment this is. But I still have them. But the concepts that we had, I really, years would go by. 5 years later, when I was graduating high school, I picked it up again, and I was like, there's some of these concepts are really good. Some of the stories we came up with were really good, and I kept fleshing them out. And then in the mid 90s, I had a word processor. And so I was like, I'm going to type these now. And so my second draft was me taking these handwritten things of a 14-year-old and going, dear God, I've got to change that. Let me fix that. And so I started typing it, and I got, 3/4 of the way through. But at the time I was becoming very involved in theater, and local community theater was my sort of social atmosphere. And I was acting in plays, and I was working on plays. And I realized that playwriting, script writing, was a heck of a lot easier than prose. And because I can't describe things succinctly. I can't do the Hemingway or the Robert B. Parker thing where it's like 3 sentences and that's it. And it's like no, it's 3 pages to describe something for me, because I would just go down the rabbit hole. So
The Tom Clancy method.
yes. The book would have been like this thick and wafer thin as far as the plot goes. But I was like, man, this playwriting thing is so much easier. A play script is like 100 pages, 2 hours on stage. It's one and done. And so I really threw myself into playwriting and kind of abandoned everything else. And obviously, international intrigue and spy novels are never going to work on stage. So I sort of moved away from that for a number of years, and until I met another guy who we became writing partners on a couple of projects in the late 90s. And we wisely or stupidly figured out a way to adapt the Robin Hood legend to stage, and not as a Men in Tights kind of comedy, but somewhat serious, very swashbuckly, very reminiscent of the original kind of Star Wars, the first Star Wars movie, the flavor of it, but with Robin Hood, kind of good guys, bad guys, and whatnot. And we wrote this play, and it was produced, and it was a huge success. It's been produced a number of times and been a huge success. It's never really gone beyond regional theater levels, though, because every time we send it somewhere, like we sent it to Colorado Shakespeare Festival 10 years ago, and they looked at it, we're like, we love it. It's too expensive. Like, you've got 50 guys, on stage sword fighting. And then you've got, and we even figured out how to fire bows and arrows on stage, just like an illusion magic trick kind of thing. But there are all these elements that just make it daunting to want to produce it as a play. And the first thing I did with Kickstarter as comic books was we started adapting the Robin Hood scripts into comic book scripts. And less than a year ago, we published the first one of those successfully on Kickstarter. So this was kind of me kind of moving into it. But this Sex, Spies, and Rock and Roll is the first time that it's been purely my own creation. I've leaned on having a name like Mike Grell, which sells itself. Having a name like Robin Hood sells itself, but saying, hey, here are these little spy stories I wrote as a teenager that I've now, dressed up as a more adult fare. Won't you come check them out? It's a little harder sell, but I'm pleased that people are kind of supporting it. And again, that artwork, it's like people are like, let me see more of this girl. Yeah. What's going on behind that, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. So what you've kind of explained the premise of the story, but who are the who is it? Is it like who are the characters?
Yeah. It's again, when I was looking at changing things or fixing things that a teenager would think was cool, but grown adults look at and go, "Oh my God, that's so silly." So I went under the hood and kind of fixed a few things. The general premise of the main feature, and I decided to create an anthology, and I'll mention that in a few minutes as to how that happened. But the main feature is a story about 3 brothers. Their last name is Spade, as in like Sam Spade. I would rather say Sam Spade than let's say David Spade, which people, no. But you think of that. It's like, we were like, what's a cool spy name? James Bond. Whatever. It's like, Duke Spade sounds like a really cool name. And so the guy in the middle there is Duke Spade. And I've never really gone away from that name because I'm like, well, it's hokey as hell, but it's retro 80s. It's set in the 1980s. And I chose to keep it set where it was created, in the 80s, because there's a kind of a mythological Cold War 1980s rock and roll. There's like a lot of stuff in the mid 80s that really, I think, people are nostalgia for. Not that people are nostalgia for the Cold War, but people are nostalgia for that sort of aesthetic, if you will. And I thought this is kind of the perfect place to keep it because the technology is more limited. Cell phones kind of wreck everything now as far as I was watching what was the movie? I was watching some movie recently, And there was I'm not too embarrassed to say I was rewatching the movie The Bodyguard, the Lawrence Kasdan movie, Kevin Costner, Whitney Houston. And there's all these things where it's like they have to call to warn someone, and it's like, oh, they have to go find a damn phone. Like, we got to find a phone. And so I was like, we have too much technology now. It's too easy. Let's go back to an era when it was more kind of boots on the ground to get things done, and the spy world was a little more interesting with gadgets and whatnot. So the premise generally is it's three brothers. One of them is a spy. They're all in their mid to late 20s, because when you're a teenager, 28 is approaching ancient. So they're all in their 20s. So there's this. When I was rewriting the novel in the 90s, I kind of joked and said it's like if the cast of Melrose Place were doing a James Bond movie.
Yeah.
Is sort of the aesthetic where it's like it's cool young hot 20-somethings who are in a spy story. And instead of running away from that, I kind of leaned into it because I'm like, yeah, why not? As a premise, it lets you get away with a lot, using that as a device. So the main part of the story is the one brother's a spy. The other two are becoming increasingly suspicious. They keep digging and digging into things and eventually uncover his secret, which makes them,
complicit.
Most wanted. Yeah, it makes them complicit, makes them also most wanted, because now they have, international secrets that they have to be hunted down and killed now for what they know. And so that's the general premise, if you will. And it spawns an international pursuit where the characters get separated. One of them is on the run with another character, and the others are trying to figure out where they are and how to find them before the evil renegade KGB guy. And our villain is great. He's like a former KGB agent who was almost killed in an explosion and then was rebuilt with experimental cybernetic pieces. Very $6 million manish, if you will. And his being rebuilt basically has driven him somewhat insane, and so the KGB disowns him, but he's still running around trying to kill our main protagonist. Mm-hmm. So he's like a little bit of a monkey wrench in the midst of all the process. So you have all these spy agencies looking for the brother, and then you have this rogue KGB agent looking. So it's a race against time kind of thing, and it's just a lot of goofy fun, really, and I've ramped up the adult factor, because it is sex, spies, and rock and roll, which is a title I came up with just last year because I thought, I need a title. It was just originally called Spades, and I thought, well, that's a catch-all for the main characters, but the Ian Fleming books weren't called Bond. So I started thinking about it, and I thought, what's a good catchy title? And I just couldn't come up with anything. And then my son, who was 17, and he was dealing with COVID, his junior year got cut short, and he was at home heading into his senior year. He was going to spend his entire senior year at home, being deprived of a lot of experiences. But he started, for the first time, really thinking seriously about college and what he wanted to do. One of those things he wanted to get into was filmmaking. He wanted to study film. And I was like, well, why? The father questioning. I'd spent my whole career being a writer and being in entertainment, but I had to be responsible and go, I got to talk you out of this. That's the craziest thing in the world. But I decided not to. And I was like, well, why? Tell me why you want to do this. And is there any proof that you can do this? And suddenly my 17-year-old kid sends me a screenplay he's working on. And I was like, well, where did that come from? That's really weird.
Yeah.
And I open it and I start reading it, and I get this really eerie feeling because it's a globetrotting spy, very Tom Clancy-esque, if you will, caper kind of film that he's writing. And I was just like, wow, wait a minute. I recognize this, because I was doing this, in a different way. And on a lark, I took the first 12 pages of his screenplay, or it may have been more than 12, but it broke down to being 12 pages of a comic book script. And I found an artist who did the pencils, and I readapted the opening of his screenplay into a comic script, and had an artist do the pencils for those 12 pages as a Christmas present for my son.
Oh, cool.
Just to sort of show him, it's like, hey, look, this is comics and film are very close. It's like storyboards almost. So that's why comics get made into movies so easily and so often. And I did it, and as soon as I did it, I was like, this could fit in the same universe as my story in some loose way. And I thought, well, wait a minute, maybe I can do an anthology of spy stories that are all set, in the Cold War-ish era, give or take 70s to 90s, somewhere in there. And it just sort of grew from there. And suddenly I was like, the title needs to be something that fits everything. And so Sex, Spies, and Rock and Roll came to me one day, and I was like, how did that elude me for so long? And people see it and they go, oh, it's a play on sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It's also a play on sex, lies, and videotape. It's like it's instantly familiar and intriguing. And I thought, well, that's a good catch-all title for an anthology book. And so I had 2 stories for the anthology, and I had to set about to find others. And so I started looking for other artists from around the world. Thanks to social media, it's easy to find artists. And the artist of the main feature is like a 26-year-old guy in Thailand. Doesn't speak a word of English, doesn't know anything about the 1980s, but I sent him the script, and I was very careful to make sure that he could translate it. Put it through Google Translate very easily, and sent him a lot of reference photos of the 80s, because it's like, hey, you weren't there, but this is what it looked like. And he started turning in this great work, and some of the pages are up on the Kickstarter, and we just worked together so smoothly, so instantly. We don't speak the same language,
right?
But somehow we're on the same page. The artist that drew Robin Hood, or is working on Robin Hood with me right now, we're working on the second book. He wanted to get in on the fun. He's in the UK. His name is Chris Geary, and he's doing a 6-page short feature that is called The Spy Catcher. And it's kind of a silent spy versus spy, if you will, but serious. Remember Mad Magazine, Spy versus Spy?
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of like that, with a male and female agent who are pitted against each other with a mutual target, and it's told without dialogue, which I thought, well, that'll be fun. Let's try something like that. So that's a feature, and we've got a couple of other things as well that we're including. And so it just sort of kept growing once I opened that door to make it an anthology, and sort of pad it out. We're going to do a 2-page feature about some real spy, somebody really who was a spy in back in the day, to highlight that, so it has a little bit of a historical slant to it as well. And I'm doing a Spotify playlist soundtrack to curate my main story, because it's 80s pop music is a big part of it. That's where the rock and roll comes in.
Oh, I'm a big 80s pop guy. So
it's so much fun now. Going back and listening. I'm in a restaurant and I hear an 80s song and I'm like, oh, yeah, what's that? And I get get my Shazam out on my phone and I'm like, oh, I got to find out what that is. And so I've downloaded now, because I'm still analog, so I'm actually downloading to an iPod. I'm not, I was like, I have to physically have it. I have to own it if I'm going to have it. So I've been downloading tons of stuff and really reliving the 80s in a lot of ways. So it's a ton of fun.
Well, years ago, my older brother, I guess when he went to college, one of the icebreakers they did was they gave them a list of 200 lines from 80s songs, and they had to. So
yeah,
he sent that to me. I spent probably a good 2 months trying to figure them all out. This was before the internet really. You could just type in the line, and I would listen to the station 80 stations on the satellite, and as soon as I heard a line, it's like, I know that line, right.
Yeah.
So and then I downloaded them all.
No, I'm the same way. And when you're in high school and you're in your 20s, music is so important, in your life, and going to concerts is so important. And so I've made that a big part of this comic as well. That there are references, it's very, very diligently researched, so everything is accurate. I'm not including any songs that would have been released a month after the story happens or whatever. I'm keeping it within a really tight time frame. But yeah, when I was in high school, I was such a snob I liked what I liked, and I was like, other things were ridiculous or boring or whatever. And here's the prime example. So I used to absolutely loathe Def Leppard. I'm now kind of down the Def Leppard rabbit hole, if you will, because I'm like, oh, there's this one scene where this should be playing on a jukebox. It should be like something like hair band type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, oh, I'm going to go looking, and I found a couple of. I was like, yep. And then that's all. I'm listening to it all now, and it's like I used to be like such a snob about this, and now I'm just like anything retro 80s. Immediately, my ears sort of perk up, and I'm like, oh, it makes me happy. And it just takes me there,
Well, for me, I was probably when I was in grade school. It was like the mid '80s, and
Okay.
I went to a private school, but we on the car ride, my uncle was one of the teachers there, so he would give us a ride to school. And when we rode with him, that's when we got to listen to the cool radio, because my parents wouldn't let us listen to like the pop rock.
Top 40 is evil. That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that really, that music really brings back a time, that my time of rebellion.
Absolutely. Well, and I think there are enough of us who are kind of comic book nerds who are that age. I mean, if you grew up in and around comics in the 80s, before the 90s got really kind of crazy. There's some, I take issue with some of the 90s, but in the 80s, it was like the modern golden age of comics, independent comics, and it was just like the world broke open in the world of comics in a way that we're still feeling the effects today. What happened in the 80s is why we have all of these comic book movies now. That's where the groundwork for that came from. And so, heavily influenced by that. And I think the culture, the music, and everything about that period is easily romanticized, not just because that's the period I was a teenager in, but also because that's truly the last great period. Everything has been very same for 30 years, very incremental fashion. It's like we've gotten really kind of buttoned down where we're like, the 70s bell bottoms and the 60s, the peace, love, and whatever, the 50s. It's like every decade has its sort of definitive looks. And the 80s is like, taking speed and acid and vomiting into a blender with colors and everything else. And so by the 90s, everyone's like, hey, let's slow the roll here. It's out of control. The 70s were bad enough. The 80s, they lost their minds. Parachute pants, please. And so from that point on,
guilty.
No, absolutely. Members of the jackets, what were we thinking?
Jams.
Exactly. And from that point on, really the only thing that's gotten through the door is skinny jeans. They're like, all right, we'll let that pass. But everything since the 90s has really been sort of the same. The 80s is that last great decade of, if you look back at it, you're like, what planet is this from? This is a planet they visited on Star Trek because the way that people are dressed. And so I think people are really kind of nostalgic, and it makes it more colorful, and it makes it a lot of fun to put it on the page,
Well, that was one of the things that kind of caught my attention with the cover was, the album covers.
Yes, boy. And I carefully, I had about 30 of those, and I sent those 10 to the artist to put on there. Because I'm like, I want it to be as universally representative as possible. And some of the albums that you see there are there because there are references in the script or in the story that you'll see on page that have to do with some of those album covers, but others are just because Well, that was that's what this lady would be listening to. You've got what do you got? The Police, Huey Lewis and
Sports
the
by
News,
Huey Lewis.
everybody on that album. The No Jacket Required by Phil Collins, which is in the story as a great bit of banter. And dialogue writing is one of my favorite things. And so when characters get into nonsensical banter, and maybe you think about people like Kevin Smith with some of his early films, the way that he wrote dialogue, where it's like people just talk about useless stuff.
Well, that's one of the things that really appealed to me about the movie American Psycho, where he would just, in the book, where he would just go on, riffs about the music.
Exactly. And as a kid of the 80s, I had a friend who hated Huey Lewis and the News and Phil Collins. He was more of The Cure and Susie and the Banshees kind of guy. And he was reading American Psycho because, well, he was a bit warped. But then he came to me and he goes, "You need to read a couple of chapters in this book. It's like they're career reviews of Phil Collins and of Huey Lewis." And I read them and I was like, "That's really good. I mean, that's really spot on." And I said, "What's the rest of the book about?" And he told me, and I was like, "Get out of here!" It's like, come on. But that movie is about the 80s and about the excess of the 80s and the book as well. But the movie, I think, works because it taps into that retro 80s thing. And it's a bit of a parody, and I know the book is meant to be dark satire,
right.
But there's something lovely about seeing a movie set in the 70s or the 80s that's done right.
Right.
When Almost Famous came out, and it was all about rock and roll in the 70s, I was over the moon in love with that movie. And it works because it's a costume drama now. It's like a period piece, and we're far enough away from the 80s now that it's a fun period piece to look at when you see it. So and that's what I'm trying to bring to a lot of this comic. Some of the stories are less tied. Some of the backup features are less tied specifically to the 80s. But the main feature, my story from when I was a kid, is unabashedly 80s loving, kitschy and fun, so I hope people enjoy it.
So, what are you offering, for backers?
There's a ton of stuff. I've kind of over the years looking at Kickstarter, tried to figure out, what are the best things I've seen, and I've backed a ton of Kickstarters too. I'm a firm believer of putting your money where your mouth is, kind of thing. And as a comic fan and creator, I think Kickstarter is some of the most fertile creative grounds that you can find right now for people. And it's people who, for years I dreamed of working in the comic industry, and there was always the gate that you couldn't climb over to get there. It's like it's a closed shop. No matter where you went, if you were aspiring, you just never felt like you could get in. And now this is the kind of the leveling agent is Kickstarter. It's like anybody can be a success if you package it right and you really make a compelling argument. And I've believed in and supported and backed dozens and dozens of Kickstarters over the years that I've been doing it. And so when I put this one together, I didn't want it to be overly complicated because, like I said, some people really just pile things on where it's like there are 30 different cover combinations. Here's one that's this version or that version or whatever. And I was like, no, people, I want to keep it clean. I want to keep it simple. Yeah. It's one thing. Here it is. You can get the book. You can get it with an art print of the cover. You can get it with a T-shirt with the cover image on it. You can get it with a set of postcards, the character postcards, the ones you see on the Kickstarter, the character mock-ups that the artist did. Other than that, I throw together this nice, I make this custom box with the art printed on it. And it's almost like it doubles as a slipcase you can put on your bookshelf for the books. I did it for Robin Hood, and it was a huge success. And I'm doing it for this one as well. And it's like the mystery box, and it's going to be crammed full of cool little things, stickers, and challenge coin that we do. We did that with the Mike Grell stuff, and it's really popular. just lots of kind of cool little things thrown into the box. But the big ones, and I've been really pleased and surprised by this, is offering the chance for backers to be depicted in a page of the book as a background character or as a minor character on a page or two of the book. And I had 5 of those available, and they were gone within the first 48 hours. Like people were just like, I want to be drawn into one of these stories as a bartender or as a whatever. And it was so popular that I added another one to it, like a bonus. And we've already cleared this stretch goal. There's a bonus. If you want to know how these characters became spies, I'm creating an 8-page top secret mission dossier that tells the story in kind of pages. It's almost like mission reports with redacted stuff in it and so forth. And the look of it will be photographs of surveillance pictures and photographs of the agents that look like they're paper clipped to the page. It's like, you open up a top secret for your eyes on file. And so I thought, there's a chance for me to incorporate at least 3 other original characters in this, and then later tell the story in comic book form. And so I created a category last week of, you can be one of the 3 characters in this dossier who will then later appear in an 8-page backup showing the story that you only get to see partially redacted in this dossier. So it's like this extra bonus that everybody's going to get now. And the first day, like I think in 12 hours, all of those slots were gone. Like people were like, I want to be in that. It's like, you get to be in this cool kind of secret mission folder and, get your, drawn at by the artist as a character and depicted in it. And I'm just like, wow, I'm really kind of honored at how many people want to be a part of this. And that really is a part of it too. Kickstarter is social media for comic creators in a big way. And I think you have to keep people involved. They have to feel like it's personal when they support something like this. And you put a thank you page with everybody's names listed and all of that stuff, but you're building a fan community of sort of your frontline supporters for whatever comes next. And to see people jump in and support it like this is just really, it's humbling in a lot of ways.
Well, would you like to give a final pitch for, people who, may be interested? I mean,
who are still listening at this point. They're going, God, it just goes on and on.
But and where can people find you on like social media? And
mainly I use Facebook. A lot of people complain about Facebook. Oh, it's this, oh, it's that. But for me, I'm like, Facebook is my self-promotional platform. And so you can find me, Jeff Messer, on Facebook. If you have trouble finding me specifically, you can find me through the back door by checking out. I create pages for everything I do. So there's a Sex, Spies, and Rock and Roll Facebook page. There's a Robin Hood Comic Book Adventures Facebook page. There's also Masterstroke Studios Facebook page, which is the Mike Grell company that somehow I have deceived my way into Mike Grell's personal life, and I'm the editor-in-chief of Masterstroke Studios for him. We don't work very fast, but we do have some cool stuff going on over there. And I do these projects in between things I'm doing with him. So you can find me in any of those places. I'm on Instagram and Twitter as well, at Jeff Douglas Messer on Instagram, at Jeff Douglas Mess on Twitter. I don't use those quite as frequently, so Facebook's probably the easiest place to find me. And hopefully building websites and an online shop to start selling all of these things, because I have a basement full of printed copies of a bunch of things now, and obviously I'm going to have even more. My main thing with the Kickstarter is I'm not, by the end of it, I basically spend everything that's raised in basically printing more copies, so that when the time comes, I can go to Comic-Cons and set up a table and actually have.
What are those?
Yeah, I know. Oh boy, I was at San Diego Comic-Con in 2019, and they haven't had one since. So I can say I was at the last San Diego Comic-Con, and let's hope that that's not a permanent situation. because I really would love to go back. It's addicting to be there and be. I thought it was going to be insane. I was like, it's too much. It's going to be too much because it's so big and it's so crazy. Once I got there, didn't want to leave. And as soon as I was walking away, I was like, all right, let's go back. And last summer, I might have gone back last summer, because once you're there, here's the cool thing, right? So if you get nominated for an Eisner, you're automatically at the front of the queue for tickets. Like you can get basically through a special, Eisner nominee or whatever. I don't know. So they give you a special access platform, and for at least I think a few years, you get. Hey, you can get tickets. Doesn't matter if it's sold out or not. So I was like, I'll take advantage of that until I can figure out a way to trick them into nominating me for something else. So we'll see. But I am working on lots of projects and things like that. And I'm 50 years old and as happy as I was as a 5-year-old who got that Mike Grell comic from my granddad.
Well, you're more than welcome anytime you want to talk about your other project. I'd love to have you back on, and
Yeah, man, it's been a blast. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Well, you can thank Mike for
Mike Spring. Yeah, big shout out to Mike. I've never met him, but we've known each other on social media for a couple of years now, and I love him like a brother. That the DNA report from my ancestry.com. Yeah. Told me
wanted me.
I didn't know I didn't know I was related to him, but I do feel like it now. So yeah. No, disclaimer: I'm not related to him. I haven't taken a DNA test, but I do feel like Mike and I we would get on famously. I can't wait until we can be at a con together, and then afterwards throw him back a few pints. And Chad, you're welcome to join us.
Oh well, I hope to meet you in person someday. And
absolutely.
Again, it's a pleasure having you. I'm definitely going to check this out. And if you, like I said, if you have any other projects, now do you plan on doing any more? Within this kind of vein of sex, spies, and rock and roll. I mean, that's a very broad topic.
very much. Is. This is the first one. If we hit, and it's not a crazy goal because we're now like $2,500 away from hitting it and still have 19 days left to go, which is just nuts. I thought it would be going right up to the wire. I swear I did. But the fact that we're well past our funding goal and only about $2,500 away from the ultimate funding goal, which is we'll create enough material for this project to make issues 1 and 2 instead of just 1. So you could wind up getting a free second issue with this. And then hopefully before the end of the year, I will launch the next one for another issue, and these are going to be probably 44 to 48 pages each books. So hopefully I'll launch another one before the end of the year, and the second Robin Hood project will probably launch in August, I'm hoping. Okay. So going to try to squeeze 2 more in before the end of the year. And maybe at least 1 or 2 Mike Grell projects as well, so people can kind of keep an eye on that too. So it's crazy. I'm addicted to it now. It's like
anytime you want to talk about those projects again.
Yeah, man, absolutely. And Mike loves to talk even more than I do.
Oh, that'd be great. One of the first things I read when I was getting back into comics in the 90s was his Longbow Hunters.
Brilliant. Yeah, no. When he did that, I was like, this is a new benchmark for storytelling. And just amazing. It's still to this day, I think, one of the most beautiful comics as far as the way it's drawn. It's like he took it to another level, and it really is a masterpiece work. A masterstroke, if you will, because we call the company Masterstroke. But yeah, Longbow Hunters is just amazing, and it's so inspiring to be working with somebody like that, and it really has. It gave me the courage after succeeding with a couple of campaigns of his to believe in myself and to finally do my own. And so there you go, kids. Just always believe in yourself. I wouldn't believe it that I would be entering my 50s and having the time of my life being a comic book geek after all this time.
Well, again, thanks. I know we went a little longer than we planned, but
Oh God, I know. I told you I talk. I'm sorry.
But no, as long as if the conversation is going, I don't like to stop it. So, but we'll definitely have to.
Yeah, I should have watched the clock.
That's okay. But we'll definitely get back together again. Maybe we'll get Mike in on here.
Oh God, that would be so much fun. Either one of the mics, Spring or Grell. Yeah.
How about both of them?
That would be pretty awesome too.
All right.
And both of them have great works going on too, so people should check in with them as well.
Definitely. All right. Well, stay safe, stay healthy, and hopefully we'll get to meet in person sometime.
I'm looking forward to it, Chad. Absolutely. The first round is on me.
All right. Well, I'll look forward to that, and I'll let you go. And again, thank you for taking the time to talk. And
thank you. Absolute pleasure.
I'll be in touch. Okay.
Yep. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Bye.